All right. So this is part three, of the New World Order series that I'm doing. And have a quick question, because I like to do critical thinking. I think we don't do enough of that, and as a result, we end up in lots of trouble, losing things that are very important to us, such as certain rights and things like that. We end up losing, and when you don't know your rights, I think there's a maxim that says, "He who does not know his rights has none." So. And that is brought on through ignorance and most probably not asking the correct questions because we're not bothering to do critical thinking. So I try to make sure that I critically think about things instead of sheepishly going along with whatever I hear. And the question I want to pose, something that you can think about, is with the implementation of a new world order, doesn't that suggest that there's an old world order? And then maybe we should ask, what is that old world order? All right, so that we have a foundation to work from to see which direction we're being pulled into with the new world order. All right, so what's in the old world order? And we see, as I spoke on in the other two parts of the series, that there were kings, all right, and these kings, there were kings over different nations. Okay, it was there were nation kings, not world kings, but nation kings. All right, and there were battles fought between those kings. And whoever subsequently won that battle or that war would most times go on to take over the territory or territories, and would then participate in merchandising and trade and trying to get the upper hand on the other kings and nations. Obviously, with the motive to rule, monopolize, if you will. Okay, so that would be what we've been going through since the beginning of time, if you will, time immemorial. But now there's something coming, and they're trying to institute what's known as the New World Order. And so we could logically reason that that has to do more with a world king, and that world king having smaller kings that rule territories, all right, but all answer to the one high king, the one on top, okay, and so that's, since it's a new world order and not a new territory or a new nation order. It speaks to bringing the world together as one. All right. And so I just wanted to put that out there in light of everything else that's being discussed, because what I'm trying to do here is to kind of shed light on this topic, perhaps from a different perspective, perhaps a little bit more layman friendly. And so I apologize for the background noise. I do these while I'm working. I do auto detailing, so you'll hear spray bottles and rolling chairs and things like that, but I find that this works for me pretty well. So hopefully you don't mind it too well. Hopefully you're able to, or too much, and hopefully you're able to get something out of this conversation, this discussion. All right. So anyways, the New World Order. All right. So what is the ultimate goal? Well, it appears that through corruption and through nobility classes and having particulars to certain bloodlines and families, having secret societies, through these avenues comes, this new world order, or will bring about the new world order. It's an order of secrecy. John F. Kennedy spoke against it, and we full well know what happened to John F. Kennedy in broad daylight. Okay, so Andrew Jackson spoke against the New World Order, the bankers, as well, and you see what happened to him, and subsequent other people that have spoken against them have met an untimely demise. So they obviously don't like those who don't want to go along with it, and so we see how they flaunt their power and authority. But what are we to do? How are we to see this? How are we to deal with it? Okay, so it's all about power and authority, and their main modus operandi is fear, and through merchandising and trade, they've been able to enslave us all through taxations and things like that. It reminds me of Ezekiel. In Ezekiel, I think it's Ezekiel 28. Let me see if I can find it here. Ezekiel 28. Ezekiel. I'm trying to say it over and over again so that the speak to text will pick up Ezekiel, but it's not doing so. It did Zookeeper, ZQ 28, ZL 28. It won't do Ezekiel. So, but anyways, let's see what it is. One moment. Okay, yeah, it was Ezekiel 28, where it speaks about the king of Tyre and how, iniquity was found in him, and how he was cast down from heaven. He was in the garden of God, and how he was puffed up in his pride, and because of the abundance of his trading, that's when iniquity was found in him. And that trading has to do with merchandising and trading in men, and same thing that's going on here, especially in the 1760s with Great Britain and the colonies and things like that. You see the implementation of the merchant class, which basically went around the world at the behest of the king and traded, and taxed people and implemented basically the king's policies and procedures, and there's a part in history where during the French and Indian War, these same merchants working for the king would seemingly sell armaments and different things to the French, okay, and do trade with the French. And then it looked like they were actually strengthening the French during the wartime or whatever, because of the things that it was supplying, kind of like weapons trading and all that, to the French. But then at the same time, these merchants would turn around and rob and steal back the merchandise, as well as other things, back from the French ships, okay? Kind of like pirates, but they were actually called privateers, okay? They were on the payroll, and that's what they were commissioned to do, is to underhandedly double-cross the French on their way back home, okay? So these merchants were not necessarily good guys, okay? They were on the king's payroll. They did what the king wanted them to do. excuse me, and even sometimes they would extend a sort of credit and to the purchaser. And then what would happen is the king would participate in trade wars and escalate taxes and things like that on the products, and then they would end up, the customer would end up being in default because they couldn't afford to pay the taxes. And so then the merchants would either keep the item that they used for collateral against the loan, or they would simply imprison or take away their freedom, the customer's freedom, until the debt could be paid. So a lot of what you see today is not exclusive to today. It's been going on for quite a long time, in this type of New World Order beginnings, okay? You'll see that the mercantilism, it's has to do with merchants, okay? And that's where it's kind of like cornering the market. The king would give certain rights to certain people, certain noble classes. One in particular of discussion is the merchant class, and the king would empower that class to do trade and to monopolize in a certain industry, and nobody else would be able to participate in the sale of that particular product of that industry. And so the merchant class would be enriched thereby and have a certain exclusive power. And so, whether the king imposed more taxes, such as the Stamp Act or the Sugar Act, the merchants would always win. Okay, they would always win out. They worked both sides of the war. Okay, and they acted like they were on your side when they were trading and dealing with you, but then they would ultimately be loyalist to the king. All right. So this is kind of how this hostile takeover, this new world order functions. Kind of like a Trojan horse. Deceit, cunningness, craftiness, skill. Okay, a salesman has to be pretty skilled. That merchant class was pretty skilled at what they did. And a lot of times they did not come, the historical record says that they didn't necessarily come from great wealth, but they ended up in great wealth because of their prowess. All right, and their belief in doing whatever it takes to become wealthy. All right, so that's part of the New World Order. Just a moment. You may recall in the biblical record there being a particular story about Yeshua whipping the money changers out of the temple. All right, so these were your merchant class people who Yeshua claimed had made his father's house into a den of thieves. Okay, so we see the merchants and the merchant class even there. Okay, all right, during the power of the empire. Okay, so the merchant class, what they were doing was they were bribing. Okay, they were tipping the scales, meaning making sure that the scales were not calibrated correctly so that they can unjustly enrich themselves. They were, and then defaulting people through underhanded schemes, and then locking those people up until they could pay, charging absorbent amount of interests, usury. Okay, so this is what, so you see the hand of the merchant class all through time, and you see Yeshua's ultimate stand against them and their usury. Okay, so this is no doubt a part of the new world order, the new way of doing things: unjust enrichment, usury, slavery. Okay. Underhandedness, craftiness, subtleties, and all the things alike. So it probably matters little as to whether the king was complicit in the earlier stages. No doubt in the latter part of history they were, but in the earlier stages it really matters little as to whether the king knew that these merchant classes were participating in such fraud and things, because all that mattered was that the money, the taxation, was coming in, and the king stayed enriched, and that his merchant class, his titles of nobility, were bringing in the bread, bringing in the dough. And so, no doubt that some of the people complained to the king or tried to complain to the king, but the merchant class, being the perhaps the doorkeeper, if you will, would certainly filter those out who were making those complaints. And Yeshua was one of those who was making complaints, okay, against the merchant class. And we see his ultimate end as far as how they treated him as he exposed them for what they were. Okay, so you can clearly see the beginnings there, at least of the New Testament, of the implementation of this new world order. You could see the rise to power of this mighty merchant class who participated in trade and merchandising and ultimately made slaves of men through usury and unjust enrichment. All right? That's part 3. Stay tuned for part 4.